Imagine being told that your daughter was gone forever. No brain activity, no hope, no chance. For 24 long hours, machines kept her body alive, while doctors whispered the words every family dreads: she's brain dead. Her parents stood by her bed, holding her hand, saying goodbye. A specialist prepared paperwork to end life support. But just when everyone had given up, something happened that no one, not even the most experienced neurologists, could explain. In front of stunned nurses, monitors that had been flatlined began to flicker. And then, against all science, her eyes opened. The impossible had just happened. Today, we're diving into one of the most shocking medical miracles ever recorded. A case that defies every law of biology and every prediction of medicine. Stay with us, because what you're about to see will leave you speechless, and the ending of the story is even more unbelievable than its beginning. Make sure you like this video, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications, because you do not want to miss a single second of this miracle. The hospital room was quiet, except for the constant hum of machines. Wires and tubes surrounded the young girl's body, her chest rising and falling only because of a ventilator that forced air into her lungs. Doctors had delivered the words no parent could ever be ready to hear. There was no brain activity, no measurable response, nothing left to hope for. Her parents sat frozen in disbelief, gripping her hands, praying for a miracle they knew would never come. Specialists explained in clinical tones that she had been declared brain dead, and that keeping her alive was now only an act of machinery. Hours dragged into an eternity, every second marked by the flat, unchanging line on the monitor beside her bed. The nurses tried to comfort the family, but even they avoided eye contact, knowing the truth of what the machines were saying. The father whispered promises into her ear. The mother begged for just one more chance, but there was no flicker of movement, no sign that she could hear them. The clock ticked toward the 24th hour, and still the machines hummed the same mechanical rhythm. In the waiting room, relatives prepared for the unthinkable, discussing funeral arrangements through tears. Papers were brought for signatures, doctors gently reminding the family that prolonging life support was futile. And then, when all hope seemed lost, the impossible began to unfold. A nurse noticed a twitch, so small it could have been a spasm. She leaned closer, uncertain, watching as the monitor flickered once, then steadied again. Seconds later, the twitch came again, this time unmistakable. Her eyes remained closed, her body still motionless, but something was happening beneath the surface. The nurse called the doctor, who dismissed it at first, citing involuntary muscle reflexes. But when the heart monitor spiked, registering activity not seen in a full day, the room erupted in disbelief. Doctors rushed in, shouting orders. Nurses adjusted machines, and the family clung to one another as if afraid the moment would vanish. And then, against all reason, her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, with the weight of the impossible pressing down on everyone in that room, she opened her eyes. Gasps filled the air, tears streaming down faces that had only minutes before been drenched in grief. The girl's gaze was unfocused, but it was real, undeniable proof that she was still there. The father fell to his knees, the mother cried out her daughter's name, and even the doctors, trained to remain composed, stood frozen in awe. What science had declared impossible had just unfolded before their eyes. For 24 hours, she had been gone, and now she was back. Nurses whispered that they had witnessed a miracle, something medicine could not explain. In that moment, the sterile hospital room became a place of wonder, a stage where life had rewritten its own rules. And this was only the beginning, because as incredible as this awakening was, the journey that followed would challenge not only the boundaries of medicine, but also the very definition of life and death. The room erupted into chaos as her eyes remained open, flickering weakly as if trying to focus on a world she was never meant to see again. Doctors barked rapid instructions, nurses scrambled to check her vitals, and the family clung to the rails of the bed in disbelief. The monitor that had displayed a flat line of brain activity now danced with signals, faint but undeniable. It was as if the very laws of biology had been rewritten before their eyes. One physician leaned closer, shining a light into her pupils, expecting no reaction, but they constricted ever so slightly. Another pressed her nail bed, and a faint withdrawal rippled through her hand. These were not reflexes, not meaningless spasms. These were signs of life, impossible but real. The mother collapsed into the father's arms, sobbing with joy, whispering that her little girl had returned. Yet the doctors, stunned as they were, struggled to accept what was happening. For them, brain death was absolute. There were no recorded cases of a patient declared brain dead for 24 hours, returning with function. The medical textbooks, the lectures, the years of training all said this was impossible. And yet here she was, challenging everything they knew. Specialists rushed in, ordering new scans, new tests, anything that might explain the unexplainable. Images appeared on glowing screens revealing faint activity where there had been nothing, sparks of electrical energy firing in places believed extinguished forever. The neurologist shook his head, whispering to himself that he must be seeing an error. But test after test confirmed it. Something was happening that medicine could not quantify. The family, caught between despair and hope, refused to let go of her hands. They spoke to her softly, calling her name, and though she did not respond with words, her breathing began to sync with their voices, subtle yet unmistakable. Nurses who had worked in trauma wards for decades stood speechless. Some crossed themselves, others muttered that they had never seen anything like it. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the weight of the miraculous. Word spread quickly through the hospital corridors. Staff whispered in hallways, patients' families peeked through windows, and soon even doctors not assigned to her case gathered outside the ICU to glimpse the impossible. Cameras from security feeds captured the moment, footage that would later circulate around the world, sparking debates and igniting faith. But in that instant, what mattered most was that a girl who had been given no chance was breathing on her own, her body responding to touch, her eyes flickering with life. The father whispered that he could see her soul returning. The mother swore she felt warmth in her daughter's fingers again. Doctors could only exchange nervous glances, afraid to label what they were witnessing, yet unable to deny it. Some called it spontaneous return of brain function, others suggested a misdiagnosis, but deep down they knew this was something medicine had never prepared them for. As the night stretched on, her signs grew stronger, heart rate stabilizing, oxygen levels rising, and with every improvement, the family's hope soared higher. And though no one dared to predict the outcome, a single truth echoed through the hospital. Against all odds, she had come back. And while everyone tried to make sense of it, no one could shake the feeling that this was only the beginning and that the real miracle was still unfolding. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of the intensive care unit, painting streaks of gold across the sterile white walls. The doctors had barely slept, their minds consumed by the images they had witnessed the night before. Every monitor beep, every shift in her breathing had been recorded, analyzed, replayed again and again, as if somewhere in the data lay the answer to the unanswerable. But nothing explained it. Medical records showed absolute brain death, confirmed by multiple specialists, with every test aligning to the same grim conclusion. And yet, the girl now lay with her eyes half open, her chest rising rhythmically, her fingers twitching faintly against the sheets. Nurses entered quietly, their usual morning routines disrupted by awe. Some carried trays of instruments, but paused at the doorway, unsure how to approach a patient who defied science itself. The family, who had camped in the waiting room through the night, now surrounded her bed, whispering prayers, songs, and words of encouragement, as though their voices were guiding her through a tunnel between death and life. The neurologist who had declared her brain dead only a day earlier now stood at her bedside, struggling to reconcile his decision with what was unfolding before him. He pressed her reflexes again, expecting nothing. But once more, her hand flinched, faint yet undeniable. He checked her pupils with a flashlight. They responded even faster this time. He whispered under his breath that this was unprecedented, a violation of every known protocol. Behind him, younger residents scribbled frantic notes, their eyes wide, knowing they were witnessing a phenomenon that would one day be written in textbooks. News began to spread beyond the hospital walls. A nurse, unable to contain her disbelief, sent a message to a colleague in another ward, and within hours, the story reached social media. Posts spoke of a girl who had been declared brain dead, only to open her eyes after 24 hours, alive against all odds. By midday, reporters were calling the hospital, demanding confirmation. Administrators scrambled to control the narrative, but it was too late. The miracle had already taken root in the public imagination. Meanwhile, inside the ICU, the atmosphere grew heavier. Machines hummed, staff whispered, and the family clung to every flicker of life, convinced that something divine was unfolding. Doctors, however, wrestled with a haunting question. If this was real, how much of her had truly returned? Was she conscious, aware, herself? Or was this only a fragile spark that might vanish as quickly as it came? They ran new brain scans, and once again, the screens glowed with faint activity where there had been none before. Regions of the brain once believed irreversibly silent now flickered with hesitant signals. It wasn't normal, it wasn't strong, but it was there, undeniable. The neurologist rubbed his temples, muttering that they would need to rewrite the definition of brain death if this continued. The family ignored the doubts, choosing hope over hesitation. The father leaned in, telling his daughter stories from her childhood, reminding her of the time she learned to ride a bike, the time she laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. And as he spoke, her eyelids quivered, as though the memories reached somewhere deep inside her. The mother sang softly, a lullaby from when the girl was little, and her heart rate increased, syncing with the rhythm of the melody. By the end of the day, staff no longer tiptoed around her bed with disbelief, but with reverence, as though standing in the presence of something sacred. Whatever the explanation, whether medical, spiritual, or something no human mind could yet grasp, the truth was undeniable. She had crossed a boundary no one was meant to return from, and she was still moving forward. And though uncertainty loomed over every second, the world waited, breathless, to see just how far this miracle would go. Night fell once more, and the hospital transformed into a fortress of whispers and anticipation. The intensive care unit, usually a place of silence punctuated by mechanical beeps, now pulsed with an energy no one could ignore. Doctors rotated through shifts, but none dared to step away for long, each fearful they might miss the next impossible development. The girl lay at the center of it all, her body weak, her skin pale, but her presence undeniable. Every flicker of her eyelids, every twitch of her fingers was logged and relogged by nurses whose hands trembled as they typed. The father refused to leave her side, gripping her hand as though his strength could anchor her to this world, while the mother read scripture softly, her voice carrying both defiance and gratitude. Skeptics within the hospital debated quietly in break rooms. Some argued that the diagnosis must have been flawed from the beginning, that the tests confirming brain death had been rushed or mishandled. Others countered that multiple specialists had confirmed it beyond any doubt, and that the scans themselves had been archived and reviewed by independent experts. There was no mistake. This should not be happening. Yet, as arguments raged, her vital signs continued to stabilize, slow but steady, as though her body was rewriting its own destiny. Late into the night, the most extraordinary moment yet unfolded. A nurse leaned close to adjust her oxygen mask and whispered her name. For the briefest instant, her eyes shifted, focusing directly on the sound. The nurse gasped so loudly it drew others into the room. Doctors rushed forward, shining lights, calling her name, repeating commands, and though she could not yet speak, her lips trembled as if trying to form words, her gaze following voices with deliberate intent. The room erupted in cries of astonishment. Some staff stepped back, shaken, muttering that this crossed from improbable into miraculous. Others scribbled furiously in charts, desperate to capture proof of what they had witnessed. For the family, it was no longer a question of science, but of fate. The father wept openly, declaring she was truly back. The mother fell to her knees, thanking God for what she called a divine reversal of death itself. Outside the ICU, administrators tried in vain to keep the situation quiet, but the story had already escaped. Reporters camped at the hospital's entrance, and crowds gathered with candles and prayers, holding signs calling her the Miracle Girl. News channels ran nonstop coverage, speculating whether medicine had just encountered a case that would alter its very foundation. But inside the room, far from cameras and speculation, the reality was simpler, yet infinitely more powerful. A young girl, once declared lost forever, was now unmistakably alive, her body responding, her mind flickering awake. Doctors hesitated to declare her recovery permanent, cautioning that setbacks could come at any moment. But even they could not deny the evidence in front of them. And as the night deepened, one truth echoed louder than every machine in the room. This was no ordinary patient, and what was unfolding was rewriting not just her story, but the boundaries of human possibility itself. By the next morning, the hospital was no longer just a medical facility. It had become the epicenter of a story the entire world was watching. News vans lined the streets, satellite dishes pointed to the sky, and journalists from multiple countries gathered outside the entrance, demanding answers. The hospital spokesperson gave cautious statements, insisting that privacy must be respected, yet their words only fueled the storm. Inside the ICU, the atmosphere was equally charged. Nurses who had once tiptoed around her bed now spoke with reverence, as though addressing someone chosen for a higher purpose. Doctors arrived not just to treat her, but to witness her, each trying to capture even the smallest clue about what was happening. Specialists in neurology, cardiology, and critical care flew in from distant cities, demanding access to the records, eager to examine the scans that had proven brain death only days earlier. Some arrived with skepticism, ready to expose a mistake, while others came with hope, believing they were about to study a phenomenon that could transform medicine forever. The family remained at her side, oblivious to the chaos outside, focused only on the subtle but undeniable progress unfolding before their eyes. Her hands moved with more intention now, fingers curling around her father's with weak determination. When her mother sang, her lips parted slightly, forming shapes that echoed the melody. Monitors confirmed stronger brain activity, regions lighting up in patterns that resembled waking consciousness. It was faint, incomplete, fragile, yet far beyond what anyone dared imagine after 24 hours of confirmed death. Some doctors whispered about Lazarus syndrome, a rare phenomenon where patients briefly regain signs of life after failed resuscitation. But this was no fleeting spark. This was sustained, growing stronger with every hour. Theories collapsed as quickly as they were spoken. The chief neurologist gathered his team in a conference room, displaying the latest scans on a glowing screen. He pointed to areas of the brain that should have remained silent forever, yet were now firing with undeniable energy. He admitted he had no explanation. His voice trembled as he told the staff that if this continued, they were standing at the edge of rewriting the definition of death itself. News of the meeting leaked almost immediately, spreading through the hospital like wildfire. By afternoon, international experts were arriving, some demanding to witness the girl, others challenging the hospital's credibility. The administration tried to limit access, but word spread online faster than they could contain it. Hashtags began trending worldwide. Millions followed every update, debating whether this was a miracle, a medical error, or a glimpse into something science could not yet comprehend. And through it all, the girl remained at the center of the storm. Fragile, yet undeniable proof that the impossible had happened. That evening, as crowds outside sang and prayed, her eyes opened wider than before. This time she did not merely flicker, she held her gaze, steady and aware. She followed her father's face, then her mother's, and for the first time, tears streamed down her cheeks. Nurses gasped, doctors froze, and her family cried out with joy. Cameras captured the moment from the hallway, and within hours the image spread worldwide. A girl once declared brain dead, now crying, alive and awake. For medicine, it was an earthquake. For her family, it was the answer to every prayer. And for the world, it was a reminder that sometimes the impossible is only the beginning. The shockwaves from her awakening reached far beyond the hospital walls. Universities, research institutions, and medical boards across the globe demanded access to her case files. Eminent neurologists appeared on live broadcasts, some cautiously labeling it a once-in-a-lifetime anomaly, others dismissing it as a catastrophic diagnostic error. Yet as her brain scans and vital records leaked into the hands of independent experts, the truth grew harder to deny. Multiple tests, performed by different specialists, had all confirmed brain death with absolute certainty. The protocols had been flawless, the standards followed to the letter. And yet here she was, opening her eyes, crying tears, showing responses that were impossible to fake. For the first time in decades, the definition of death itself was under siege. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was electric. Doctors moved with urgency, every test meticulously documented, every observation recorded as though they were archiving history. Some of the younger residents whispered that they were standing at the birth of a new chapter in medicine. Senior physicians, though cautious, admitted behind closed doors that they had no precedent for what was unfolding. Her recovery was not static, it was progressing. Each day brought new signs. Her grip grew stronger, her gaze more focused, her lips forming clearer shapes. One evening, when her father leaned close and asked if she could hear him, her lips moved unmistakably, shaping the word yes. The sound was faint, almost inaudible, but the family erupted in tears while the staff exchanged stunned glances. Cameras caught the father collapsing against the bed rail, sobbing with joy. Outside, the footage spread like wildfire, fueling debates that blurred the line between science and faith. Religious leaders claimed divine intervention, declaring her proof of miracles in a skeptical world. Scientists insisted there had to be a biological mechanism waiting to be uncovered. Philosophers and ethicists were drawn into the storm, questioning what it meant to define the boundary between life and death. Even governments began to take notice, with health ministries requesting official reports, fearing that the very protocols for organ donation and life support decisions might need revision. Meanwhile, the girl's hospital room became a sanctuary of awe. Her family spoke to her constantly, guiding her through memories, encouraging her to fight, and she responded with subtle, yet undeniable signs of awareness. Nurses reported moments when she seemed to track movement across the room, her gaze following them as they worked. One described feeling chills when she smiled faintly at the mention of her childhood pet. Every gesture, no matter how small, carried monumental weight. And though her body remained frail, though machines still supported parts of her recovery, it was clear that something beyond explanation was happening. By now, her case had become the single most studied medical mystery of the decade. Journal articles were drafted overnight, theories poured across forums, and teams of researchers proposed everything from undiscovered brain plasticity to errors in the very instruments used to measure brain activity. Yet all the theories collapsed against this simple, undeniable truth. She had been declared dead, and now she was alive. The hospital tried to shield her from the frenzy, but she had become a global phenomenon. Pilgrims gathered outside, praying, leaving flowers, chanting her name. Celebrities tweeted about her, hashtags trended daily. And still, inside her quiet room, the miracle girl continued her impossible journey forward, step by step, defying every expectation. Doctors remained cautious, reminding the family that setbacks were possible, but privately, even the most skeptical among them admitted that what they were witnessing was rewriting the story of life itself. And with each passing hour, one question grew louder in the minds of everyone who followed her case. If death was not the end, what else had humanity misunderstood about the human spirit? The hospital had grown accustomed to miracles, yet nothing prepared them for what was about to unfold. It was the third week since her awakening, and though progress had been steady, doctors still debated whether she was truly conscious or simply responding with primitive reflexes. Her family refused to accept doubt. They spent every waking hour by her side, speaking to her, holding her hands, singing her favorite songs, surrounding her with a world she once knew. On that morning, her brother leaned close and whispered about the games they used to play in the backyard, reminding her of the time they built a fort out of blankets and pretended it was a castle. Something shifted in her expression. Her lips trembled, her eyes focused on his face with startling clarity, and then, with a hoarse whisper that sent chills through the room, she said, "I remember." The room erupted in cries of shock and joy. Nurses froze mid-step, one dropping a clipboard to the floor. The brother collapsed into tears, clutching her hand, while her parents wept openly, overwhelmed by the sound of her voice. Doctors rushed in, demanding silence, desperate to confirm what they had heard. They asked her to repeat herself. Straining with effort, her voice cracked, but steady. She whispered again, "I remember." The words were undeniable. For the first time since her return, she had spoken, not with random sounds, but with coherent memory and intent. The ICU, once a place of despair, now vibrated with awe. Staff who had spent decades in medicine confessed they had never witnessed anything so profound. Some stepped into the hallway, overcome with tears. Others recorded their observations with shaking hands, knowing they were documenting history. Within hours, the moment spread worldwide. News outlets replayed the clip endlessly, her faint words echoing through television screens, phones, and radios across the globe. Commentators debated endlessly. Was this true consciousness? Was this proof of something beyond biology? Religious leaders declared her words a testimony of the soul's resilience, while scientists scrambled to frame it within the boundaries of neuroplasticity and recovery. Yet no theory seemed strong enough to contain the weight of what the world had heard. For the family, there was no debate. Their daughter was back, not just in body, but in spirit, reaching across the chasm of death to remind them she was still herself. That evening, when her father asked her if she knew who he was, she whispered, "Dad." He collapsed against her bed, sobbing, unable to believe the moment he had prayed for had arrived. Her mother followed, pressing her forehead against her daughter's, whispering that she had never stopped believing. Doctors tried to temper expectations, warning that recovery was fragile and the brain mysterious, but even they could not deny the evidence. She was communicating, remembering, reclaiming her place among the living. Outside the hospital, the crowd swelled into the thousands. Candles flickered, songs filled the air, and people from across the world traveled to stand on the sidewalk, hoping to glimpse the windows of the miracle girl's room. The hospital administration deployed security, but even they stood in silence at times, moved by the sheer gravity of what was happening. And as the world held its breath, one truth became undeniable. The girl who had been brain dead for 24 hours was not just alive, she was aware, speaking, remembering. Against every law of medicine, she had crossed a threshold no one thought possible, and she was still moving forward. The miracle had deepened, and no one, not even the most skeptical voices, could deny it now. The day her voice grew stronger, the hospital could no longer contain the miracle within its walls. Doctors had prepared the family for the possibility that she might never progress beyond whispers and faint responses. But now her words carried weight, intention, and clarity. Each syllable seemed to erase the despair of the past, replacing it with a tidal wave of hope. That morning, when her father leaned close and asked if she knew where she was, she paused, her brows furrowing in concentration, and replied softly, "Hospital." The family burst into tears, and even the nurses could not hide their emotion. A senior doctor, his hands trembling, asked her to name her mother. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head and whispered, "Mom." It was undeniable. She was not only conscious, but aware of the people she loved. Her parents embraced her, their sobs filling the room, while staff members quietly excused themselves, overcome by the enormity of what they had witnessed. By now, the outside world had turned her story into a global phenomenon. Crowds outside the hospital had grown so large that traffic was redirected. News networks broadcasted live 24 hours a day, speculating about every detail. Scientists debated endlessly, but no consensus could explain the impossible. Was this divine intervention, a breakthrough in neuroplasticity, or something humanity simply did not yet understand? Religious leaders called her survival a miracle, while skeptics accused the hospital of fabricating details. Yet the medical evidence, verified by independent experts, left no room for denial. She had been brain dead for 24 hours. That was fact. And now she was alive. Inside the ICU, the family shielded her from the chaos. They focused only on her recovery, cherishing every word, every glance, every flicker of recognition. Each day brought new progress. Her speech grew clearer, her responses quicker. Therapists began gentle exercises, guiding her arms and legs, and though weak, she followed instructions. Doctors who had once whispered doubts now spoke openly of rehabilitation, even the possibility of a future beyond the hospital walls. When she managed to say, "I love you," to her mother, the moment was captured by a nurse's phone and leaked to the world. Within hours, the video was everywhere, touching millions of hearts, uniting strangers across continents in awe and wonder. For the family, it was the confirmation they had never stopped praying for. She was not just surviving, she was returning, step by step, to the girl they remembered. On the final night before her transfer to a rehabilitation center, the hospital staff gathered quietly outside her room. Doctors, nurses, technicians, and even janitors stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding candles, others simply bowing their heads. They had all been part of something history would never forget. Inside, her family held her hands, telling her how much she had changed the world without even realizing it. And though her voice was still weak, she whispered the words that silenced the room. "Thank you." It was more than gratitude. It was proof of her spirit, her will, her unshakable return to life. Outside the hospital, the crowd erupted into cheers as news spread that she was stable enough to leave intensive care. For the world, she had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that life can triumph even when science insists it cannot. For the medical community, she was a mystery that would fuel research and debate for decades to come. But for her family, she was simply their daughter, their miracle, alive against every odd. And as her story reached its conclusion in the ICU, a new chapter was only beginning, one where the impossible had already been proven possible, and where the world would never again look at the line between life and death the same way.